Omar Suleiman, which would essentially allow the president of Egypt to remain in power perhaps by title only, but not in function. Now, when we talk about this, one of the issues that is very sticky is that the protesters are demanding that President Hosni Mubarak step down, which essentially means resigns or leaves the country. If he does so, what would emerge is that the president would then have to transfer power to the Speaker of the Parliament, the Speaker of the People's Assembly, in accordance with the Egyptian Constitution. It does not go to the Vice President, which is what everyone presumes. It would essentially go to the Speaker of the Parliament. If that happens, the Speaker of the Parliament must order elections within 60 days without being able to change the Constitution. And if that were to happen, the Constitution is now such that it is favored for the ruling National Democratic Party to nominate a candidate, because in order to be nominated for president in Egypt, it requires 1/3 of votes from the parliament, and the parliament now is 90% controlled by the ruling National Democratic Party. So in essence, they would be the only ones allowed to nominate a candidate. So this is right now the sticking point in which they are unable to force the president to leave, because if he does, he would then hand power to the People's Assembly Speaker, and it would have to be held, the elections, within 60 days under the current terms of the Constitution. That is not going to satisfy the protesters, and it would most likely mean that a continuation of the regime and the same ruling elite.
Are they seriously talking, though, with the Vice President, and they've met also with the Prime Minister, about Mubarak leaving the country before September if these powers can be transferred to his deputy? Are those senior representatives of the government seriously discussing Mubarak being out of the country before September?
Well, this is now the interesting point, because I think, and from the people that I've been speaking to, nobody has come out and said that just yet. What we heard yesterday from Vice President Omar Suleiman, and this is by far the most public statement to date, to try to dismiss the notion that the president is going to step down or leave the country because it would amount to a coup, is that, you know, all the talks right now are focusing on what type of face-saving mechanisms could be put in place to ensure a few things. If indeed the president does step down, it won't be in the form of a resignation. It would be in the form, and we've heard this in some media reports, that he would leave the country perhaps for a prolonged medical treatment, whereby he would essentially transfer within the constitutional limit the powers of the executive authority to the vice president, in which he would then be allowed to undertake the constitutional reforms needed to ensure free and fair elections. These are the talks that are taking place right now. But what I was saying earlier about there are two tracks of talk, this is only a track of talks that is taking place with this so-called Committee of Wise Men and some loosely affiliated opposition groups. It does not represent the protesters who are camping out day in and day out, because this coalition of protesters is much more loosely organized. They don't have yet a very clear hierarchical structure that negotiates on their behalf. And that's why we are seeing this kind of political limbo between the demands of the protesters, the negotiations or the talks as they're taking place with this so-called Committee of the Wise Men, and the Egyptian government, which refuses the notion that the president will step down in accordance with the Constitution.
I understand the dilemma. Ayman, thank you very much indeed. That's Ayman Mohyeddin. Well, on top of all the anti-Mubarak protests, workers have gone on strike in Cairo, Alexandria and in Suez. Several hundred workers have been protesting at the Suez Canal, calling for the resignation of their immediate boss. They're demanding better pay and social equality as well. They're not the only ones on strike. Let's catch up with our correspondent, Shireen Tadros, is in Cairo. Who else is down tools, Shireen?
Well, essentially, there have been two important developments in that area. First of all, we saw 4 independent unions, so not the unions that are state-sanctioned, but independent ones, go on strike. They joined the protesters. They actually marched from their headquarters in downtown Cairo to Liberation Square, and they are demanding an end to the Mubarak presidency. Now, the second development came in the sporadic strikes that we saw around Cairo, and those took place at various state-owned businesses and companies around the city. So I personally, when I was going around Cairo, I was seeing these sporadic protests taking place in the electric company, in medical insurance building, and quite significantly, I think that should be what you're seeing on your screens right now, 200 to 300 people outside the telecommunications building in downtown Cairo. There wasn't a political demand here. They were saying that they want better salaries, they want an end to the disparity in the pay, and they're demanding their 15% increase that was promised to them from the state. They made it very clear to me that they're not wanting the end of the Mubarak regime, they just want their rights. But clearly they've been inspired by what's been happening in the past 2 weeks, and they feel that they're better able to really go out and talk about their demands in this public way, which is something that we haven't been seeing in Egypt for a long time.
Yeah, that is the point, isn't it, Shireen, that they're perhaps testing the water because, as you point out, you know, they've been tolerated by the regime, almost sanctioned by the regime, but any time they've caused any real difficulty, they've been sat upon quite heavily. So they're linking their situation to the protests in a way that sort of says, you know, let's see what else we can change in Egypt.
Yes, I think you're definitely right. And although they were pressing this point home that their demands were economic, there was definitely a tinge of political demands as well. And at one particular company, I heard shouts down with the Mubarak regime. So certainly the protests, as we've been seeing, is spreading beyond Liberation Square. And that is something that I think anyone who's going around Cairo and in other cities are seeing. Now, the question will be, how far will they spread beyond that? Will they spread to the big unions? Will they start affecting the workforces in the steel companies, the agricultural sector? If that starts happening, we start seeing major strikes on a nationwide level, that will certainly change the game here. That will bring Egypt to a new crisis point, at least economically speaking.
Shireen Tadros, thank you very much indeed for putting that in perspective for us. Some of Egypt's most famous tourist sites have been hit by the protests. Yep, you recognise these ones? Normally surrounded by people, the pyramids. Currently are open to the public, but as you can see, not a tourist in sight. Even the Sphinx looks more inscrutable than ever. Shops around the structures are closed, and it is estimated that all of this may have lost $1.5 billion in tourist revenue for Egypt. Now, taking a look at other news now, 7 people have been killed and more than 70 have been hurt in a series of car bombs in the northern Iraqi city of Kirkuk. Let's hear from Tanya Page.
As security forces race to one bomb site, another attack. Panicked voices shout instructions. It's chaos on the streets of Kirkuk, northern Iraq. This was a multiple bombing against security targets in the city. 3 explosions in quick succession. Cars used as delivery devices. The blasts took place in predominantly residential neighbourhoods. The thick black smoke pinpoints the locations. In the aftermath, security forces fan out to take control. The twisted wreckage an indication of just how powerful the blasts were. At the local hospital, those caught in the attack walk around dazed and desperate. There have been a series of attacks in the region on security forces ever since the US announced its withdrawal of troops. This attack continues that pattern. Tanya Page, Al Jazeera.
The Indonesian Muslim cleric Abu Bakar Bashir is about to go on trial again, and we'll be telling you why prosecutors are hoping it will be 3rd time lucky for them when we come back. And a collapse after just 2 days. They couldn't even agree on an agenda. North and South Korea. The talks are over again.
Over the Sea of Japan, as cool conditions persist, you'll find something to whet your appetite.
Very cold weather to come across a good part of North America. This wintry plunge is set to persist. We've got snow now making its way away from the central and southern plains. That will sweep its way through quite quickly, actually, as we go on through the course of Thursday. So brighter skies coming in behind, but boy, is it going to be cold. -4, a top temperature for New York, and -12 there for Ottawa. Struggling around freezing for DC, and we're looking at highs of just 9 degrees in Atlanta. About the only warmth I can offer you really is going to be down towards that southeastern corner, 26 there in Miami. Even Dallas will struggle to reach freezing. -2 could be the top temperature here on Thursday then. Some warmth too into the western side of the US, and notice some snow coming into BC, so western parts of Canada still staying very wintry once again. That snow pushing in over the higher ground. Come down into the Caribbean, and there's quite a rash of showers here. Some wetter weather just making its way across the Gulf of Mexico. Not too bad for the Greater Antilles, and even the Lesser Antilles I think should stay largely dry, but down towards the south, Trinidad and Tobago, maybe pushing as far north as Barbados, could see 1 or 2 sharp showers. Showers or longer spells of rain continue to drive their way into that western side of Europe, but on a southwesterly wind, it's mild. Temperatures getting up to around 12 degrees Celsius, but cold on the other side of Europe with Moscow at -13 degrees.
Qatar Airways, world's 5-star airline.
Home to a diversity of rare species, Latvia's pristine woodlands are a place of magic. But with a strained economy and an eager market, forests are rapidly perishing, and with them their inhabitants. People and Power investigates how 60% of Latvia's timber ends up on UK shelves with a questionable seal of approval. Latvia's Pulp Fiction, at this time on Al Jazeera.
We'll update you on the top stories, starting with events in Egypt. Over the course of the last few hours, there are thousands of people still protesting in the capital, Cairo, against the country's government. It's a live shot in Tahrir Square, that's Liberation Square. And not only are they there at this hour, just after 6 p.m. in the evening, but they're also now outside the Parliament building, and soldiers have got inside to protect the building. Well, these people have been joined in their protest by 3 independent trade unions, members of those unions, and that is as workers in the city and in Cairo, Alexandria and Suez have gone on strike. And not directly linked to these protests, they are protesting about pay and conditions. And a group of political and business leaders